Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Safety Brief, your go to podcast for everything cybersecurity. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and as we dive into the month of October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we're taking on some spooky topics. And today, that is Ghosts in the Machine and uncovering hidden threats. Because, yes, I hate to break it to you, but ghosts do exist in cybersecurity, and they can be lurking in the shadows of of your systems, and your clients' machines. I'm joined today by our resident expert, Mike. Thank you for being here week after week, tackling our goal of spreading awareness. Your dedication is much appreciated.
Yeah, no doubt. Resident expert's a tough title to live up to, but I'll do my best here. I think we're having a ton of fun getting into the spooky season, but one aside I just want to mention because this is live and we are humans and we're four-dimensional. So I think the southeastern United States has had a rough couple of weeks. I just want to acknowledge that. So for those of you who may be listening live or listeners from those regions or know people in those regions, yeah, we're thinking about you really heavily. It's funny how we can get on, and it's tough sometimes. I find it tough in my own heart to get on, talk about cybersecurity, because it's such a point of um, there's got to be a certain standard for these things to matter, right? Like food, water, shelter, security, livelihood, right? Those things really have to be firmly grounded in order for our conversations to have merit, or a value in the grand scheme of things. And so right now there are very many thousands of United States Americans and citizens that are going without food, shelter, water, and that certainty. And so as soon as last night with the hurricane, or as soon as 2 weeks ago. So just acknowledging that. Um, Thoughts and prayers out to you guys and those that are affected. It's neat. I will say it is neat to see the one silver lining, and then we can get back to cybersecurity. Um, is you've seen a sense of ownership and loving your neighbor the past 2 weeks out of American citizens, and it's been neat. And absolutely, I'm sure there's been some foreign aid in some form, but it's just been encouraging to see. So kudos to those out there doing the work with chainsaws and gloves, and as good as you could be on cybersecurity, sometimes you just gotta get dirty, get sawdust on you, and move some logs. And as 2024, that's still a valuable task. So it's never going away. So shout out to those linemen, first responders, getting power back on, getting people back to work. But there's a lot going on right now, needless to say.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. It definitely takes the entire community to rebuild and come together. And it is beautiful to see people, providing help and making changes where changes are needed. So I
Right.
appreciate you bringing that up. Our
Yeah.
thoughts and prayers are definitely out there to anyone who's affected by any of these recent events. So I appreciate you bringing that up. All right,
But
well,
ghosts.
onto a lighter topic. Not so much lighter. Let's start off with the basics. Let's break down some of the most common hidden threats that can infiltrate an organization's devices without being detected right away. This is a good one because if you're not a Blockworks partner, you most likely are utilizing detection only and haven't jumped on that amazing prevention bus that we're
Right.
huge about here at Blockworks, leaving you vulnerable to most of these attacks. So, what are some of the most common hidden cybersecurity threats in the field today?
Oh man. I'm gonna go with three. If we had to pick three, we'll pick
Okay.
three. So the first one is gonna be social media ads. Okay, social media ads that have some crazy things that they bring along with them. So, for example, there are certain ads and advertisements on things such as Instagram and others that are incredibly relevant to the viewer. And they're going to click on it. They're going to be redirected to a website. They're going to be redirected to a payment portal for a product or service that they believe is legitimate. Most people find themselves scrolling and doing things like this. Sometimes at work. Sometimes at work. I'll just be the guy. Not everybody works at work 24/7, 365, right? So sometimes we're scrolling. Sometimes we're, just doing what we need to do during the workday, but sometimes we get distracted. And so it is interesting to see what kind of products and services and goods are being sold that are not legitimate, or maybe not legitimate in their country of origin or where they're located, things like that, right? That's the first. I think social media ads are very enticing, but be sure to validate the company that is doing the advertising. It's not always a legitimate company. It's not always a legitimate place. Just be careful. Obviously, advertisers like Meta and others look to vet those things to see if they're legitimate. but it's not always the case. Not always the case, right? Like X, for example, we can't even live stream on X without an X premium or validated membership, right? They
Yeah.
do that so that those that are live streaming have some skin in the game, if you will, that if they don't meet community standards or they don't meet some form of legitimacy check, there's a safeguard in place, right? Somebody just user scrolling, thinking it's a good deal, thinking it's a good stream. It's just not everybody can walk up and do that. And so, second one is going to be video game anti-cheats. Video game anti-cheats. Now,
Oh,
it specifically where more in the IT space, but more so also elsewhere in BYOD environments, bring your own device environments, you will see people bringing their home computers into work, obviously virtually speaking, right? So they are going to have whatever computer they have at home be their work machine. Now, for today's instance with a video game anti-cheat, we're going to assume that somebody has a gaming computer of some form or fashion. Video games are prevalent, especially PC, as well as they are using that for work. What do all video games or most video games install along with their package at a kernel root level? Sometimes they're very, very deep hooks in the process chain that these anti-cheats are. What can they do? Log keystrokes, monitor what's being input via the keyboard, and not just monitor it, but pipe that data back to another location, sometimes in this country, sometimes not in this country, and where it's maybe less common that the video game manufacturer itself is malicious. The question is then that data is being gathered and stored somewhere. Where is it stored? With what security is it being stored, and who can access that data?
yeah.
And so, again, I'm not out here saying any video game companies are out to be the ghost or haunt you or steal your stuff, right? But hey, that data is being gathered, it's being transmitted, sometimes in country, sometimes extra out of country. What level of security do you think a company is putting on that data? And what happens when that company has a breach? We saw an instance where CD Projekt Red, the creators of Cyberpunk 2077, the entire source code for the game was leaked.
Mhm.
Entire source code for the game. That's everything. That's where do certain connections are be established? Where does the server live? Where does the data live? Where is it sent? There's a lot of people understand, like developers understand the source code gravity statement, right? They understand what the weight of that is. Most people think, oh, well, I bought my game. Who's going to hack my game? Right. And again, it's more so we got to think of this in a way that threat actors are going to have access to data that are holds on the metaphorical rock wall, right? They have a goal they want to get to. Every single piece of this data is another hold that they can grasp onto, make it easier for them to get to that end result, right?
I
And
like that you brought that up. Sorry, I just wanted to point out, like, if you're gaming on like DayZ or Microsoft or any of those games that provide allowing you to host your own server, that's also giving actual people, not just the
100%.
game or the people who manufacture the game. It's also giving them your IP logs. They will
Oh yeah.
know everyone who logs into their server. So that's
Yeah.
another thing to keep in mind if you are gaming online servers.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, these ghosts, we're sharing these as things that do present cyber risk, but most don't even know they're there, right? That's
Yeah.
why they're ghosts, right? And so social media ads not being legitimate, not being from real companies, the joke of like Temu type products, right? Like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, right? Like is it legitimate? Is it not? Temu will say it is. You order something from Temu, you order something from the store, Target or whatever, you tell the difference, right? Anyway, the second thing we talked about was specifically video game anti-cheats. Third are browser add-ins. Okay,
Mm.
so browser plugins. So what do I mean? I mean all those keyboard clippers, all those dark mode readers, all of those things that we just warmly welcome into our browsers. In the name of convenience, the
Guilty.
name of cost savings, nobody's going to argue that point, right? Get on there, use all the coupons, right? Like do it. Absolutely do it. Don't have it monitor every website you go to, right? Don't do that. I find that there's ways to do this strategically. Use one web browser for browsing. Use another browser with all your add-ins and additions for shopping, right? You could do that. Segmentation is a good thing. It shows up in many different forms. I'm not saying down with Honey and all these other keyboard clippers and coupon clippers. They're good, but you got to understand that they're monitoring the websites you're going to. They're indexing that information. That's how they're able to tell you if there's a coupon. They have to look at the page you're on to tell you if there's a coupon or not. right? And so these ghosts, we just warmly welcome into our environments. Again, this could be on a personal machine. This could be on a work machine. People are like, what could a browser plugin do, right? It can do a lot. It could do a lot. We are actually tinkering with in the lab the past 7 months or so our own browser plugin for the sake of monitoring network connections from a security perspective, right? Hey, is that IP address on a known block list? Is that IP address that's attempting to be connected to on a potential DNS redirect proxy, right? Things like that. We're able to monitor, again, it's people trying to get in the way of a good, healthy connection on the internet and thwart it, redirect it, put it somewhere where they want it to go. That's bad, so I would say those three are going to be probably the top three I can think of here as far as ghosts, things that we don't maybe see until you see them, right? And if you've ever seen a ghost, I can't tell you if you have or haven't, if you have, but once you see it, you don't forget it. And so, again, specifically browser plugins are a big one. Social media ads, you just need to be burnt by one, just burnt by one and you'll know, okay, yep, ghosts are real. And then, video game anti-cheats, or like you said, just a video game, peer-to-peer connections in general, right? If you're hosting your own server, you are not only sharing your data, you are welcoming people onto your front lawn, into your home, right? And so,
then if you're joining, you're also sharing your information.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think again, and there are certain games, right? I think there's games that do a very, very good job of making sure that there is no tampering in that way. And then there's other games that are 10+ year titles that are great, that are really, really fun, that people have there's a large player base for those games. But, again, the code was developed 10, 15+ years ago. And if Microsoft has to release patches on Tuesdays for something that existed last week, you can only imagine how much a surface there is with 10 years in, right?
Yeah. Another thing to think about too is like when you're thinking about ghosts or like hidden threats, you can also think about threats that maybe aren't per se insider threats, which are good examples that Mike presented. I think all of those kind of fall in line with insider threats, but more so attacks that can evade antivirus or detection. So like there's malware that's fileless. It operates directly in system memory. That avoids traditional file-based detection methods. There's advanced persistent threats, zero-day exploits, rootkits, and like Mike said, insider threats. So it's definitely things that you want to keep an eye out on and just know how to look for those things. So another thing to think of is these ghosts are constantly evolving. They don't want to get caught. So, for example, the fileless malware differs from traditional cyber attacks by operating directly from the memory, using trusted system processes like PowerShell to avoid leaving traces on the disk. This makes it harder to detect with traditional antivirus tools as it blends in with normal system activity and uses sophisticated evasion techniques, requiring advanced detection methods like behavioral-based analysis, which is actually what we utilize for our endpoint security services, MAID plus EDR, allowing us to prevent these types of attacks. So, Mike, how else do hidden threats differ from traditional cyber attacks? And why are they so much harder to detect with traditional detection tools?
Yeah, it's a good question, Elizabeth. So I'm gonna paint a picture here with some may recognize, some won't. And that's okay. So if you've ever either been in a wedding or if you've attended a wedding, it's very difficult to determine who's at that wedding. Why? Because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of stuff going on. Now, what happens if you've ever been to a backyard wedding, a very intimate wedding, a very small scale event? You're going to remember the majority of the people there. It was intimate. There were a few people. It wasn't a large event, but it was memorable, right? There, you remember the 5 or 6 people that were there with you. The backyard wedding was most cyber environments maybe 10-ish years ago. Okay, there was a very small number of devices. It was easy to inventory who's on the network and who's not, because not as many things were connected. If you go to a 200-person wedding, you're lucky if you see the bride and groom for more than 5 minutes or even talk to them, right? Because it's just so much going on. So what's the point? The point's not go get married. The point's not host a wedding, although those are good things. The point is that because the number of devices, the number of connections on a network are so much more. I'm talking compounded multiplication numbers here. of hundreds of devices now. And again, this isn't user specifics, right? You can say, I only have a 25 user shop. I bet you at least 80 devices are connected on that 40 user shop, right? You got to think phone for the user, tablet for the user. If they bring it in, their Kindle, they bring it in, they read over their work break. They're going to have that connected. You're going to have their workstation, which is connected. You're going to have at least 3 to 5 printers in the office, which are connected. Probably going to have some security cameras, probably going to have some servers, right? Like we're at 60 and we don't even know it, right? And so inventorying your networks is 100% an easy way to start identifying what is risk I didn't know about, what is gap I didn't know about, right? So, but the candidly, the very difficult thing for a lot of IT firms to do is properly inventory, right? Because it's like all I see is IP addresses. Who is what? I don't know who's on first, who's on second, who's on. I couldn't tell you who any of these are, right?
Yeah.
Without going around the office, pulling up every machine and looking at the IP address, right? And so there are some benefits with enhanced networking gear like this. We leverage Palo Alto Networks personally, and we have a way to integrate devices with usernames, meaning if a user is logged in on a device or authenticated on a device, it doesn't have to be a company-owned asset. It could be any type of asset, but if they're VPN'd in or if they're physically on premise, we can see based on their Active Directory account, which they authenticate through, what devices belong to them. So now we can say, okay, hey, I see 5 of these devices belong to Julia. These 3 belong to Ben. 2 of these belong to Greg, whatever it is, right? And so, but being able to inventory what devices belong to what users, you can then be quicker time on target to say, hey, I see a malicious IP or a malicious connection take place on this device. I see that currently it's under Melinda or Brian or Ben's machine or whatever it is. Now I can go to them and say, hey, out of the 4 things you have, what do you think is connecting to this? That is a much quicker time on target than being, hey, office, somebody's iPad is connecting to a rogue IP in China or Russia or Iran. Nobody's raising their hand, right? Nobody's raising their hand. And so I think, a quick time on target in the way of network telemetry, a typical detection rules will give you an IP address. They will seldomly give you a username, especially if it's like a system. The process is being called by system. That doesn't help you that much. But any way that you can cross correlate IP address to device name or IP address to username, there are tools out there that we use specifically, but that tools that exist that help get you that quicker time on target.
I love that example because I was just looking at my own, application to see how many devices are connected, and just my husband and myself and our infant, we've got more than 10 devices connected. That's
Ain't crazy.
our
Isn't that crazy?
consoles, our,
Right.
washing machine, my
Now you got me
his
curious.
PC, my phone, our 2 iPads, my mom's iPad. Like we just had so many. So I can only
Yeah.
imagine how someone can take inventory of that properly without having tools in place. It's
Right.
ridiculous. So
Right.
just
And
us alone, there's like
just for the 2 to 3 person home,
yeah,
Yeah. No, that's insane. Yeah, I'm looking now. I got 1, 2, 3. Yeah, TV, smart TV,
yeah.
doorbell camera, iPad, Apple TV, home security, the Nintendo Switch, the Peloton, the watch. Yeah, your watch. Your watch connects too, So like now we're walking around with 5 internet connected things, right? And so it is a lot. It is a lot, right?
You
Yeah.
gotta
And
think when these
so
people walk into your building as well, or if they're
it's
working from
insane.
home, yeah, they're all connecting to that same network that
Right.
their computer is connected to. So
Right.
definitely something to think about.
No doubt.
And ghosts don't leave obvious footprints. So observant organizations can still pick up on some subtle signs like changes in system behavior. So what indicators should companies or individuals look for to detect these ghosts hiding in their system?
Yeah, no, this is a good question. So this is going to come down to just basic performance monitoring on machines. I'm talking servers most often specifically here. So there are certain applications, certain tools that IT teams can leverage, like Logic Monitor, Science Logic, things of these natures, where you can specifically monitor the CPU, the RAM utilization, the disk utilization of servers or workstations, if you'd like. But the point of this is you set a threshold of what is normal behavior versus abnormal behavior. So if you see a certain server exceed 50% CPU, exceed 80% CPU, you can get alerted on this. And this is very similar to if you have 8 kids or 5 kids or whatever it is, and you have heart rate monitors on each of them, right? I can't be there to keep tabs on every kid, but I can get an alert, maybe, let's say, on when one of them travels outside this geofenced area, or when one of them has a heart rate that spikes, or whatever it is, right? Like, there is certain vitals that you can pull from these servers to monitor that. It's not perfect, right? Because you're going to investigate every high CPU alert, and it could be malicious, it could not be, and all of this is detection based. But I think, having some form of vitals, or even patch management, almost like an enforcement that says, hey, all of these servers have been patched, but this one's having difficulty with this specific patch, right? You get an alert for that potential risk. And so, again, these are all little nooks and crannies where ghosts can be hiding out on. It's an unpatched machine. It's a machine that just has 89% CPU all the time. It's not normal typically for an average server, depending on its function or use case, right? If you're running a custom application, maybe. If it's a backup server during the backup window, maybe it should be that high consistently. But again, the point is that any of these little nooks or crannies, right? You think of it like a bug exterminator, right? You want to find out where the bugs are going to go to hide, And so you need to identify, hey, if we're not automating patching and patch enforcement, meaning if you just push patches, that's one thing. If you're not getting any form of report saying, hey, these are the ones that didn't succeed in the patches, there's potential risks, right? And so, it's one thing to pack a lunch for your kid to go to school. You got to make sure that lunchbox is empty when you come home, right? You could be packing the lunch, but who knows if they're giving it away, or if they're, what they're doing with it at school if they don't eat all of it. But, it is important to not just send those updates, but also make sure that they are being accepted and run successfully.
Yeah, if your device is running slow out of nowhere or slower than normal,
Right.
where it's definitely a sign that you want to look into. When it comes to detecting hidden threats or ghosts in your system, it's all about those subtle signs. Keeping an
Right.
eye on these changes can help detect those stealthy threats before they cause major damage.
Right. Or like an application crashing or just something, right? Users can be
Yeah.
like, you get a user report of like, oh, my machine blue screen. And it's like, well, what, Brian, what happened before this happened? He's like, well, for the past few weeks, this pop-up would launch, and then I just hit okay and close it out. And it's like, that's happened for 4 weeks and we haven't said anything, right? And so those little things typically are bigger than you think. And then everyone's like, I don't want to bother IT. I don't want to bother with it. I don't want to, what, again, it's one thing if it starts with a limp, but now you can't walk. That's a bigger, more expensive health matter to address. No different with cyber, right? Get those small signs, make sure you have a way to inventory them. Even create a way, like, you can be really creative with Microsoft Forms. If you're an MSP or a IT provider, maybe create an alternate method to intake suspicious or nuisance requests more than like outage requests. So if you intake all of your tickets from support@helpdesk.com or security@helpdesk.com, if there's just like, hey, this isn't as big of a deal, but I just want to catalog it, spin up a Microsoft form and give it to users and just say, hey, the day you noticed the thing, when it happened, what the machine is that it happened on, and just catalog it, right? Have somebody go through that in their off time and just have an idea of, hey, this isn't something that I need a response on. I'm just trying to document that this happened, like Outlook crashed at this time at this date. Then if it happens 3 times in a row, okay, hey, maybe it makes sense to open a ticket like this, right? There's ways to minimize the amount of effort and lift on IT teams and users to start generating some of those things.
Yeah. Every time you break a bone, it doesn't mean it's going to be sticking out of your arm or leg.
Correct.
No, it's not always apparent and upfront and flashy.
Right.
So don't ever be scared to reach out and ask questions. That's what
Right.
the team is there for.
Right.
Well, sadly, we are missing the brilliant Matt today, who's always diving into malware, ghosts, and all things spooky and cybersecurity.
Yeah.
He ensures we're
Herald of Doom. That was
Yes,
his
he
name
is our
last week.
Herald
We
of
gave
Doom.
him the Herald of Doom. He just announces all the bad that can happen.
The headless hackman as well. Many names for that
That's
one.
right. I forgot about the headless hackman. It's very spooky season themed. Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Yeah, unfortunately, we do not have Matt. He is tending to much more important matters, but he is neither headless nor hacked, which is good.
Yeah.
And so, but specifically, I think, bringing his perspective into this, I think that there are more ghosts out there than you think. Whether you believe in them or not does not make them real.
And he
And I
plays with
think,
them daily.
oh yeah. And then I think I think the whole point of that would be, hey, don't listen to this being like, oh, it's silly analogy. Yes, it's silly analogy. We do this every week. We got to keep people coming back somehow, right? And so, but I think the point is that far more people have these ghosts, these unknown threats in their environments than they think. And if you're one sitting there saying, who would I be to target it, or who would I be to have these in my environment, you very well could be having a real situation right now where there's something undocumented or on your network. Doesn't mean to evoke this like fear is a terrible motivator, right? We're not over here to scare tactic anybody into this, but rather garner awareness that most cyber threats are preceded by an initial access or a foothold that is established, right? And then once they have that foothold, the next thing they establish is persistence, right? What happens if I lose my initial foothold? How do I get back in? What's my back door, right? And so those are very real things. They are executed on the daily basis, right? You could be the American Water Company, which is immense in size, one of the number one water providers in North America or the United States. They're hacked, right? And again, it comes down to that fact of how many devices do you have to inventory? Some people think the bigger the enterprise is, the more secure they are, the more they spend on cybersecurity. So the bigger you are, the more attack surface you have. But that's equally as true with the small firm, right? The smaller you are doesn't mean you're more secure. More likely to use free or consumer-based security rather than business enterprise-grade stuff. But the beauty is there's a lot of tools coming to market, a lot of services coming to market, even like Blockworks, having no minimum, no commit, that serve that smaller delta, that bring that enterprise level of security to smaller based firms, right? That where there is no 1,000 minimum commit per month and all these crazy lofty goals, right? Because small business is the backbone of our economic really framework. There's a lot of it small business, over 80%. And so, yeah, important things for sure.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the fact that most people think that they're not going to be targeted. But in reality, when you go fishing, you're not looking at the fish that you're wanting to catch. You're throwing your bait out there
Right.
and waiting for someone to come. So that's how cyber
They don't
attacks
care what fish. They
normally
want
take
a
place.
fish.
Yeah. So
That's
they're
right.
not targeting you specifically on most attacks. Sometimes it can be targeted attacks, but most of the time they're throwing the bait out there. That email that they sent to you that you clicked on that led to all these events was also sent out to 300, 3,000, 3 million other people. Like Hornsby said, they're not fishing for you, they're fishing for anyone. So
Right.
that is definitely a mindset shift that needs to take place as well. But speaking of that, and his wonderful works that he does to make sure that we are stopping all these ghosts in their tracks, how can threat intelligence help uncover these hidden dangers before they cause significant damage?
Yeah, I think, threat intelligence is an important component because it informs your detection engines, right? It informs what is bad look like, what does suspicious look like. And without those, you have a situation where, you're trying to do a Google CAPTCHA and it says click all the buses, but you don't know what a bus looks like. Well, guess what? It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. And so catching the bad guy is a nice metaphorical nicety, a platitude to put on a banner, but you got to know what bad looks like, what IP addresses, what type of event IDs in Windows OS are suspicious, what type of attack patterns or behaviors you want to set your detection engine to. We partner with an incredible firm named Lima Charlie that really has unprecedented sandboxing over creating custom detection rules. If you can think of it, you can detect on it. Really, it's that malleable. Obviously, it's a lot to build, meaning you got to specify what you want to detect off of. But there's a lot of potential there. So we've created situations where, hey, if somebody attempts to disable antivirus without a sanctioned key, if somebody attempts to tamper with this, flag that as an alert. Hey, somebody's pulling on my door, but does it unlock it with the key? That's suspicious, right? It's not just they visited my door, but they touched the door and they pulled on the door. That's what threat intelligence is, hey, what kind of markers do you want to have of suspicious? Because it's one thing for a gentleman to walk in to an outdoor world with a beanie on when it's fall, it's we'll say it's 45 degrees outside. Hey, that makes sense. He's got a beanie on, right? He's got a ski mask on because it's 20, 30 mile an hour winds out there and it's cold, right? Well, what happens when he walks in an outdoor world with a bulletproof vest, a shotgun, and a ski mask on? Okay, well, these are markers of indicators that indicate a higher level of severity, a higher level of suspicion, right? But you got to make sure you have that. What does bad look like or what does suspicious look like before you can ever hope to detect or prevent. And so that is where threat intelligence comes in. And there are feeds, there are tools that come with this, there are platforms that come with this, there are open source rules that are written for this. It's a wide variety, but your actionability, your response needs to be informed. Number one, not to stop something that's good that doesn't need to be stopped. You're interrupting a user at that point or stopping business, and then actually stopping what is bad. Efficacy goes two ways.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike. Threat intelligence is a game changer when it comes to uncovering hidden dangers before they cause real damage by providing real-time data on emerging threats, patterns, and vulnerabilities. Like you said, Mike, it helps organizations spot patterns and identify that suspicious activity early on.
Most
So, of
definitely.
course, like you said, we want to provide some practical advice and not just scare our listeners or viewers. So, what tools or strategies or services would you recommend for MSPs to proactively hunt down and eliminate these ghosts from their clients' environments? I've already mentioned one, which is behavioral-based analysis tools, but
Yeah.
are there any other suggestions or things of that nature you may have?
Yeah, no, I do absolutely, and I'm happy to name drop this one. So Huntress is very, very good at going into an environment and discovering what potential footholds exist. Okay,
Yeah.
so that is Huntress's niche. I think they're very, very good at that. Their strong suit is not prevention. Their strong suit is not deterrence. Their strong suit is, hey, I want to scan an environment. I want to see what in way of persistence or footholds currently exist, and they'll shine light on the ghosts. They'll find your ghosts, right? That's what they'll do. They won't keep them out. They won't respond to them or prevent them in a timely manner. That's not their aim. That's not their goal. That's just not what their platform is superior at compared to other solutions. But they are good at finding ghosts. I will say that they are the Ghostbusters of the Windows OS, Mac OS machine. So that is a good platform. I will also say our endpoint solution includes a level of inventorying. We talked about this earlier within the network standpoint. You also got to inventory the files installed in your machine, right? You think about how old a computer is, or maybe how many times it's changed hands if it's an organization owned system. Not all of these are wiped after the fact, and not all of these are reimaged after the fact. Who knows what's just sitting on that machine from 2 employees ago or 3 employees ago, right? And so the reality is we need to inventory every single file on that machine. No questions asked. And so we do that. We do that default. We look at every single locally attached file on disk. We look at what is it today dormant, but then we look at every single file again anytime it actions anything or takes any form of initiating a connection or a process with another process, for example. So we look at all of that from an inventory standpoint. But I will say that if you are suspicious of ghosts on your machine, our endpoint solution does a very exhaustive job of looking at every single locally attached file there and seeing, hey, and it could be suspicious, it could be malicious. We look at both, so hey, we found this keyboard, this anti-cheat, but we also found this RMM. Hey, I understand you use Ninja RMM, you're an MSP, that makes sense that that's there, good to go. But we're still going to inventory it because we want to know that it belongs there, right? And so again, it comes back to a strong inventory.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought up scans because I've noticed that some MSPs are more afraid of vulnerability scans than they are of these hidden threats. But the reality is these scans are essential for finding those footholds and vulnerabilities that could turn your organization into a haunted house rather than a secure, thriving business. So my advice is to embrace scans. It not only helps you identify these threats, but provides an actionable plan to address them. And here's a plug for you. If you do want to learn more about the Blockworks vulnerability assessments, head over to blockworks.com and check out our INVAP service, Managed Vulnerability Assessment Platform, or feel free to reach out to sales@blockworks.com. The Blockworks team can turn into your Ghostbusters this October and show you what's hiding in those shadows of your clients' devices. So, well, to close things off today, I know we've seen some pretty interesting things, like you said, Mike, even in just our 14-day POC monitoring periods by our Made Plus EDR. So, can you share any real-world examples where hidden threats were successfully uncovered and what steps were taken to mitigate?
Yeah, most definitely. So specific to this point, I will say that we have seen a lot of ghosts, right, in the form of on endpoint machines. One, that's worthy of mention because it's relevant is we deployed our EDR and endpoint solution to it was not a large IT firm. Okay, it was not a large MSP. They managed, I would say, mostly sub 10 user networks. Okay, and I don't say that as in like their business model is supreme to another one or whatever. It's just that was the scale, meaning it was smaller size shops. And our EDR picked up on within 2 hours being deployed, we had, I want to say, upwards of 8 to 12,000 remote desktop connection attempts. And that is insane for any known environment for that to be the case. But what we discovered was that these attempts were being made. They were unsuccessful attempts, but they were attempts being made in a brute force manner. Essentially, that port on the firewall was open, but it was not, they were not successfully getting through. But you give the internet enough time, you give any bad guy enough time on the internet to just kind of poke at it long enough and see, well, how can I get through? What credential do I need? Right. And if there's no monitoring in place, then this is going to happen. It's just going to
Yeah.
continually happening. People have no clue. In thousands of times a minute, people are walking up to their front door with a different type of key combination. They're just trying it. They're just trying it. That's why monitoring is really important. And so, sure enough, we tossed this telemetry over to the partner, and they were like, "You got all this already, and you just deployed?" And like, yeah, sure enough, all of this is populated in just a very short amount of time. Sure enough, they went ahead and looked at their firewall. It was a Meraki that they had configured for remote access, and sure enough, open port RDP specific to 2019, 2020. So that port had been there for about 18 months
Oh
by
wow.
the time that we had our endpoint deployed. And so, yeah, wild to find that live. I mean, you're literally, it's like you don't have a doorbell camera and then you install it and then you see 1,000 people an hour walk up to the front door and try the front door. It was very like,
Insane. Yeah.
holy smokes, right? Like you kind of like validating what you're looking at. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, actually, this is real. This is happening. And so um, that was one example. That was one example. Somebody that just didn't know that that was happening because they didn't have the monitoring at that level to see that.
Yeah, that was a really good example, Mike. Thank you for sharing that. And if you are an MSP and would like to know more about our POC program, our POV program, where you can try this and get that monitoring that he was talking about for free for 14 days, feel free to head over to blockworks.com or reach out to sales@blockworks.com. Well, thank you, Mike, for joining today. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Safety Brief. Remember, while October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, cybersecurity is important year round. So be sure to catch us next time as we explore more cybersecurity and maybe even some more spooky topics. Well, thank you so much and stay frosty.
Thanks all.